Today I want to show you how you can protect your EA or custom indicator from copying or unauthorized use. I'm not going to be using an activation server or any third-party DLLs for this. All of this is done inside the MetaTrader code, but these are things that you can implement yourself without too much trouble. And there could be several reasons why you want to protect your EA or custom indicator. So on the screen here I have my EA that I'm going to be using to demonstrate this, and just between you and me, this is a guaranteed no loss expert advisor. It's fully working and it will never lose a trade, and I want to protect this. So let's look at some situations where I might want to protect it. First, I might want to release this as a demonstration type product for trial purposes. I'm going to be including a license check.mqh file, which I have here ready to go. And I'm going to be setting the properties inside the main EA so that when this license check is called, it will return the result, letting me know whether this can operate or not. Now, firstly, note I've got property strict here. This is important. Certain coding techniques will not work without property strict, and I've used those techniques in the license check file, so remember to turn this on. Now, first thing I obviously need to do is include that license check file. I do that, yeah, this still compiles, fine, but it doesn't do anything yet. There is a function that you can see I've already written in here called license check. To use that, all I need to do inside the on-init section is this statement. So all I'm saying here, if the license check function returns false with this not, so if not license check, return init failed. And if I do that in this on-init section, then the EA will stop straight away. It still compiles, but we're not doing anything yet. So situation number one, where I want to allow this on a trial or demonstration mode. I'm going to do this with defined statements. You could do it with global variables. I just prefer to use the defined statements because I think turning those on and off is more obvious in what you're trying to do. So I've defined here license trade mode, and I've set that as an array containing array trade mode contest and array trade mode demo. So the third trade mode would be real, and if I include that, that would include everything. So by setting this, I'm saying I want to allow only contest and demo account use of this EA. Now I have to implement that inside this license check. As I said, I'm doing this with defined statements, so I want to check that that particular value has been defined. So this license trade mode. I do that with the ifdef statement, hash ifdef, and finish with hash endif. So if this has not been defined at all, if I come back here and simply comment this line out, it hasn't been defined. When I call this function, it will simply fall through. In fact, the compiler won't even build this code, and then it will just return true. So that's one of the reasons I like using these defined statements. I simply turn them on and off, and they work or don't work. Turn that back on. Now I'm going to be including several tests in here, so I'm going to set one variable that I can use to determine whether I've been successful in them. So I'll be reusing that variable in the various tests here. First thing inside a test is to set that valid to false. Now I know I've already set it here, but if later I come and insert another block above this, I may be changing the variable, so I just want to make sure I set it here. And now I'm just setting up a variable called valid modes, and that's going to hold the value from license trade modes. So over here, I declared this with the bracket syntax, which means that it's ready to be used to initialize an array. And I've set up my array here that I'm going to be using for the test, and I'm simply assigning that value into the array. And now I need to get the current account trade mode, so I'm using the account info integer function and passing account trade mode into that, which will give me a long value back, and that's why I've declared this as a long. And I'm putting that in a variable called account trade mode. Then all I have to do is loop through the trade modes defined in this valid modes and see if one of them matches the account trade mode. So I'm simply looping through the array of valid modes, comparing my account trade mode variable to the variable in the valid modes at position I, and if I find one, then I'm setting this valid to true, and so that I don't waste any time going through this loop again, I've got a break statement here which will take me straight to the end of the for statement. There are only 2 to 3 values in here, but I'm just using good practice there. So once I get through here, I want to know if I found a valid value. So if I get to this point and valid is still false, so it's been set here and we haven't reached this statement, then I'm just going to print an error message, return false, which will come back here and fail at this check. So I should be able to compile this now. Declared that incorrectly. Just before I go further, I've noticed I need to subtract 1 here. So array size valid modes would give me 2. I actually need to begin at position 1 and count down to 0. So remember that -1. Just again, that works. What I'm going to do, just to prove this, I actually have a demo account that I'm going to run it on. So if I remove account mode demo and change that to real. So now I'm ready to run this. I'm going to be running against a demo account, so this should fail because it's not a contest or a real account. Compile, run. And here in the experts, there's my message. This is a limited trial version. Initialization failed, uninit, and removed. So the EA completely failed simply because I didn't have the right type of account. Just to prove that, I'll go back again. Change this to demo. And run. And now, although I've got auto trading turned off here, you can see it's running here on this chart. And if I don't want to use that particular check, all I have to do is comment this line and everything still runs. Now the next kind of restriction you might want to put in here would be to restrict the symbols that can be traded. So let's put in something very similar here. So here I'm using another defined statement. This one's licensed symbols, and I've just defined GBP USD and USD CAD. Now remember, these are strings, so I've enclosed both of them in quotation marks where the licensed trade modes were integers, so I didn't need to do that. So now to run this test, come back in here. I can still leave this block of code because it will activate if I define licensed trade modes. And the code is much the same, so let me just copy this. Very similar code. All I've done is change the variable here to valid symbols, defined it as a string, still assigning licensed symbols to that, still looping through the array of valid symbols now. I don't need to capture a variable to begin with because I can just use this symbol, comparing that to valid symbols, setting valid to true if I find one, and I've just changed the error message slightly. So now this will only work with those 2 defined symbols. Let me compile that, make sure there are no mistakes, and now I'll run it. We go back. Limited trial version will not work with the symbol AUD/USD, and initialization failed. So another simple way of restricting the use for trial purposes. The next situation might be where you've been perhaps paid to write an EA or an indicator, and you need to make sure you do get paid. So you want to release it with a time limit. And this is just slightly more complex. I'm going to define two values for handling this, and one of them will be optional. So these two definitions, license expires days, I'm using that to say this will work for 30 days from a given date. And license expires start is where I can define that given date. And this is the optional value, because if you don't set that, I'm going to be defining this as the date that this application was compiled. Now, remembering that only license expires days is required, so my hash ifdef statement. And then, as I said, license expires start is optional. So I'm going to use hash if not def, if ndef. And I've defined license expires start as date time. So what I'm saying here, if I haven't already defined license expires start, then I'm going to define it as date time. And this value from here is the file compilation date and time. So by default then this would give me, in my case, 30 days from the date that this application has been compiled. So now I'm declaring a variable to date time. I'm calling this one expired date, and this is the point in time where this application will stop working. And that is simply license expires start, the start date or whatever was defined in the main EA, plus the number of days multiplied by 86,400, which is the number of seconds in a day. Now for the time limited copy, I'm going to print a message even if this is valid, just to say that it will expire. So I'm using the print format statement. This will print, it's a time limited copy, the license to use expires at, and then we'll fill in a string in this placeholder. And the string is, I'm using the time to string to convert expired date to a string. And then it's pretty simple. If the current time, using the time current function, is greater than this expired date, then I just print the license has expired. No need to put any more information because I've already given the license information here, and then I simply return false. Make sure that compiles. That does. Now I've set this as 2021-0301. I'm already 30 days past that, so if I run this now, I should get a failure. Then we have time limited copy, license to use expires at 31st of March. License has expired and closed down. If I just take out this expires start, so now this will give me 30 days from the compile date. And I run this again. Time limited copy, license to use expires on the 10th of May. So this is a simple way that you can build something in if you're perhaps building this for someone who has commissioned you to build the EA, and by leaving this license expire start as optional, you don't need to keep remembering to change this as you go through revisions. Every time you compile a new version, there will be 30 days to run. And the last situation might be where you've sold this and you want to limit this to only work on specific accounts, so that it makes it difficult or impossible for someone to simply share it with other people because they won't have the same account numbers. Now you could embed the account numbers in the application, but that would mean compiling this again every time someone buys a copy from you. I'm going to set up a license key. Now the first thing we need for that is a private key that will be the crypto key that's going to be used inside your application. So that's my private key, and this is also the trigger to say that I'm going to be using licensing inside the application. So ifdef license private key, that tells me that I have licensed this for restricted use. Now you could compare this to things like an email address, but it's very easy for someone to share their email address if they want to distribute this across the internet. So I'm going to pick up the account number simply because that's something that the platform can pick up for me directly. So to get the account number, I use account info integer, and the argument to that is account underscore login. Now, just for the purpose of the demonstration, I'm simply going to override that. Now, to perform the encryption, I'm going to have to convert this account number into a character array. So I've declared the account char array here. And then to convert this number into this array, I'm going to use the string to char array, but this is a number. So I first need to convert that integer to string account, which gives me a string, and then the string to char array breaks that into individual characters and populates the account char array. Now I need to do the same thing with the key. So I'm just breaking the private key and putting it into a key char array. Now, the one thing I've forgotten so far, for this to work, I also need the customer to enter their license key. And that means I need to pass it as an argument to this function. So it will be a string, and just in case I'm not using the license private key, this will not compile. I don't want to be forced to pass an argument if I'm not going to be using it, so I'm just setting the default here of an empty string. Then back in my original EA, of course, I'm going to need an input. So I just capture that as a string in the inputs, and I'm passing it into this license check. So now with that value, what I need to do is compute an encrypted value based on the account number and the private key, and compare that to the license key that's been entered. So just as with the others, I need a char array. And now I need to encode the account number into that char array. So I'm using the crypt encode function here. I'm asking for a SHA-256 hash, passing in the account characters built up here, the key characters built up here, and the result characters, which will hold the result of the encryption. That will give me a character array, but I need to convert that to something visibly readable. So by again using crypt encode with crypt base 64, I will convert that result char into an array of characters that are readable and that could have been entered by the user. So to compare that now, I'm converting the character array from the result back into a string using the char array to string function. And then by simply doing a string comparison of the result against the license that was entered, I can say this is an invalid license, and for this demonstration I'm going to print what the license should be so that I can capture that and then enter it the next time, and then I'll return false. Let me run that, and now there's one input. I just won't bother to enter a license code. If we go back here, this is the code that I should have received back. Now, of course, you don't want to write an EA that's going to do this just so that you can give a license code to your customers. So let's create a script that you can use to generate these licenses. Now, if I'm going to create a script to generate these keys, I really don't want to duplicate all of this code. So I'm going to take some of this and put it into a separate function here called keygen. So my keygen function will take the account as a string and the private key. Just copy all of that code. So the first step, I still need the array of account characters. I'm still using the string to char array. Because I've passed the account number in here as a string, then I don't need to worry about converting the integer to string. I'll do that in the function that's calling it. We'll get back to that in a moment. I still need a uchar of key characters. Instead of using license private key though, I will use the variable private key that was passed in here. These statements are the same. I'm still getting a string result, and then I just want to return that. So the change that I'm going to make here then, I still want to capture the account number, and for this demonstration I'm still just going to override it with this number. But after that I'm just going to call keygen. So now I've moved all of that code into a separate function, and I can use that function to actually get a key that I can give to a client. Make sure that still compiles, and it does. So now the license generator here, and I've already written the code for this. This is a script, but I have inputs to it, so you need to include this hash property script underscore show underscore inputs. If you don't include that, then the script will run, but these input statements are not shown. And the two things I want to capture: the private key, which you should make different for each of your EAs or indicators. So you'll need to enter that, and then the client's account number. So this does require that the client will give you the account number to generate the key. And I've still included the license check.mqh file. That way I'm using the same function for this that is going to be used by the EAs or the indicators. All I'm doing then is calculating the key based on that keygen function, and I'm displaying it back in both an alert and in a print statement. So now if I run this, it's asking me for inputs, and the private key that I had in the EA was Orchard, and the account number that I used, 9. So here's the alert. Has the key in there. A little bit difficult to copy that, but here I have the key is, I can copy that, and then I can give the client this string. So now if I go back to this restricted EA and I run this again, at this point I can enter that key, and my EA is running, although I still have auto trading turned off, and it's running with the license that was input. Just remember though, as I said, you don't want to include this line, so I'll take that out. Now if the end user doesn't have a valid license, it will simply fail here. And I can simulate that again. I'll just change this account number. So now I'm simulating that this has been handed off to someone else who has a different account number. I run that, I'll put in the same license code I had before. Now I can see the same license code was input, it's invalid, and the EA is terminated. If you want to use a shorter license key, you can always truncate these, so you can truncate the result to say the first 8 or 16 characters, but generally people are going to be copying and pasting these, so it shouldn't be a problem to use the full key. So those are some techniques for preventing copying of your EAs and indicators. And as I said, the first are simply to restrict where these EAs or indicators can be used on demo accounts or competition accounts. There's another technique that you can use if you've maybe contracted to someone to write and you want to make sure that they don't simply use your product without paying for it. And the final one, if you're selling this openly and you want to issue licenses to customers, it will mean that they have to come back to you and give you their account number, but you don't need to have an authorization server and you don't need any third-party DLLs for this. So I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, remember to click the like button and subscribe and click the bell if you want to see more of these videos. Thank you.